He took her virginity for a bet, but she gave him something he never expected regret that haunted him more than any price he had ever paid. It started in a penthouse overlooking the lights of Manhattan, where billionaires played with power like it was poker chips, and nothing felt real except the thrill of the next win. Chase Montgomery sat back in a leather chair, a glass of aged bourbon in his hand, as one of his closest friends leaned forward with a smirk. "I bet you can't do it," said Brandon, grinning as he flicked an ice cube across the marble bar. "She's not like the others, Chase. I've seen her. Books in her hand. Not a hint of designer anything. Way too wholesome for your usual type." Chase raised one eyebrow amused. Wholesome. What is this, a high school drama? No, but it's a challenge. That girl who volunteers. At the library event last week, Clara, quiet, polite kind, looks like she's never even been kissed. Brandon's voice had a bite of mockery in it, the kind only the rich and bored could deliver with ease. "So what's the bet?" Chase asked, eyes sharp with the thrill of the hunt. "A week," Brandon said. 7 days, get her into bed, and prove it." The room went quiet for a second. The others laughed, not because it was funny, but because this was their language: power, games, conquest. Chase didn't hesitate. He smirked. "You're on." Somewhere across the city, Clara Bennett closed up her evening shift at the small bookstore on 3rd Avenue. She didn't know that her kindness and quiet strength had just been turned into a wager. She didn't know that someone with everything would come looking to take what she had guarded her whole life. She had never been in love, never even been close. Life had been too demanding, too full of part-time jobs, too full of watching her mother fight an illness with more bravery than anyone should have to muster. Clara had no time for parties, no time for games, but sometimes the most dangerous moments are the ones that seem innocent. Sometimes evil comes in a perfect smile and expensive suit. And when Chase Montgomery walked into her bookstore the next morning and asked about a book he already knew she loved, Clara smiled. She smiled because she had no idea what he really wanted. She smiled because she believed people were good. She smiled because she thought someone like him would never look at someone like her that way. But Chase wasn't playing fair. He never had. He had 7 days. He didn't think he'd need that long. But what he didn't know was that Clara wasn't just another girl to conquer. She would become the one person who could make him question everything he had built his life on. Because even the cruelest games have consequences, and sometimes the loser isn't the one who gets played. Sometimes it's the one who walks away with a heart he didn't know he still had. The bet was simple. The aftermath would be anything but. Clara Bennett's world was nothing like his. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Brooklyn, the walls thin, the air always smelling faintly of detergent and dust. Her mother, once a vibrant literature teacher, now spent most days battling stage 3 lymphoma. Clara worked part-time at Page and Leaf, a quaint independent bookstore that barely made rent, and spent her nights studying for her nursing prerequisites. She didn't go to parties, didn't post on social media, and didn't dream in luxury. She dreamed of healing, of scholarships, of being able to buy her mother the medicine she needed without worrying about choosing between that and groceries. Her life was built on small routines: early bus rides, lectures, 12-hour shifts, and quiet evenings, spent reading aloud to her mother. She lived in a world of quiet strength and quiet sacrifices. Chase Montgomery, on the other hand, was the youngest CEO in Montgomery Holdings history. His name was printed in Forbes, whispered at private clubs, and screamed in finance forums, where people speculated on his net worth like a sport. He wore tailored suits that cost more than Clara made in a month, drove a car most people only saw in movies, and lived in a penthouse that had its own rooftop garden and private elevator. He came from legacy and privilege, born into a family where emotional restraint was praised and image meant everything. His father had built an empire, and Chase had been taught to expand it, never question it. Feelings were liabilities, attachments were distractions, relationships at best were alliances, and yet despite all that, Chase had always felt something hollow inside him. Every win in business brought diminishing returns. Every woman in his bed was a forgettable name. His world was efficient, but lonely, full of people who smiled too wide and cared too little. Clara intrigued him precisely because she didn't belong in his world. When he stepped into Page and Leaf, everything slowed down. There were no flashing screens or boardroom tension, just the soft scent of old pages and the quiet hum of classical music from a dusty speaker. Clara stood behind the counter, hair pulled into a loose ponytail, reading a hardcover with the kind of concentration that ignored everything else. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment her expression didn't change. No spark of recognition, no flirtatious glance, just a polite nod and a quiet, "Let me know if you need anything." That surprised him. He wasn't used to being unseen. He browsed the shelves, trying to look casual, but he already knew what to ask. Brandon had done the research. "Do you have the latest edition of The Nightingale?" he asked, approaching the counter. Clara's face lit up. "It's one of my favorites. We actually just got a copy in this morning." She pulled it from behind the counter like it was treasure. Her eyes were clear, honest, and full of a kind of gentle intelligence that made Chase hesitate. She spoke about the book with such quiet passion that he almost forgot why he was there. Almost. She handed him the book, their fingers brushing slightly. "You read much historical fiction?" she asked. He smiled, lying smoothly. "It's growing on me." That made her laugh softly, the sound unpracticed, like she wasn't used to someone trying to impress her. That made him curious. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Each visit, he asked about a different book. Each time she opened up a little more. He learned about her mother, her dreams of nursing school, the way she walked 3 blocks out of her way to bring soup to her elderly neighbor. He found himself memorizing the curve of her smile, the way her eyes softened when she talked about helping people. She was nothing like the women he usually entertained. She didn't chase him, didn't ask for favors, didn't even know his last name until he accidentally dropped his black card one afternoon, and she blinked, then said, "Montgomery, like the buildings." "Something like that," he replied, trying to deflect. She didn't press. That night, Chase sat in his penthouse, staring at the unopened messages from Brandon. "How's it going? Made your move yet?" He didn't answer. Something had shifted. The game had started to feel less like a game. And the girl with the bookstore smile was starting to make him forget why he'd come in the first place. It began with borrowed books and stolen minutes. Chase kept coming back, always under the pretense of finding another title or needing a recommendation. Clara started expecting him without realizing it. She would glance up every time the bell above the bookstore door chimed, and though she never admitted it, there was a flicker of warmth when she saw it was him. He made her laugh, not loud but real, the kind that bubbled up from places she hadn't touched in years. He asked questions no one else ever did, about her dreams, about her fears, about what kind of nurse she wanted to be, and why she liked stories set during the war. Chase listened, and that shocked her. Most men only waited for their turn to talk, but he listened like her words meant something. For Chase, those conversations started as strategy. He knew connection mattered, he knew attention worked. But somewhere along the lines blurred. He stopped checking the time. He started rereading the books she mentioned, just to be able to talk about them without bluffing. He caught himself watching her when she spoke, trying to memorize the way her eyebrows lifted when she was passionate about something, or how her voice lowered when she talked about her mom's illness. He forgot to text Brandon back. He stopped going out at night. His driver waited longer outside the bookstore with every visit. Clara, too, found herself changing. She started wearing her hair down more often, added lip balm to her bag, even though she told herself it was just because of the dry air. She never said anything to her mom about Chase. It felt too new, too fragile, like a soap bubble that might pop if someone else tried to hold it. But she thought about him too much. He asked her one night if she'd ever been to Central Park at midnight. She laughed. "Why would I be in Central Park at midnight?" "Because it's magic," he said, "and because I'm asking you." She hesitated. "I don't go out with customers." "Then don't sell me anything," he replied, smiling. "Just come for a walk." And she did. They walked for 2 hours from the fountain to the lake, with only the city breathing quietly around them. He told her about his childhood, about the pressure of being a Montgomery, about how success had become a cage instead of a crown. She told him about the moment her mother collapsed at school, how she held her hand in the ambulance and promised to find a way to keep her alive. It wasn't romantic in the usual sense. There were no candlelit dinners or grand declarations. But it was real. He kissed her that night, just once, soft and hesitant, like he was asking for permission. Clara pulled away first, not because she didn't want to kiss him again, but because her heart had started to race in a way that scared her. She wasn't used to wanting something for herself. Not like this, but she saw something different in his eyes. Not charm, not victory. Just a man who looked like he'd finally found something that made him feel real. They kept seeing each other, in secret, quietly. No announcements, no labels, just moments. He started helping at the bookstore's reading nights, sitting on the floor with the kids who didn't care about his last name. He brought her coffee during her early shifts. She texted him encouragement before his board meetings. She didn't care about his money, and he didn't care that she couldn't offer him the life most women tried to build around his wealth. It was messy and imperfect, but it was theirs. One night she invited him to her apartment, not because she was ready, but because she trusted him. He sat on the old couch with her mother and listened to her stories. He helped carry laundry downstairs. He looked out of place in his tailored coat, but he didn't complain. He didn't run. He stayed. Clara stood in the doorway watching him. And in that moment, she realized she wasn't falling in love. She already had. The night they made love was quiet. No background music, no dramatic confessions. Just hands and whispers and eyes that didn't look away. She gave him everything not because she was naive, but because she believed he was different, that he had changed, that what they were building was real. She fell asleep with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, believing for the first time that someone had chosen her without expecting her to save them. Chase lay awake long after she drifted off. He looked at the ceiling, her breathing soft against his skin, and for the first time in his life, he felt afraid, not of losing, but of breaking something that finally mattered. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a message from Brandon. "So did you win the bet?" Chase stared at the screen. Then he looked at Clara, and for the first time, the victory didn't feel like something to celebrate. It felt like a curse. The morning after sunlight poured through the faded curtains of Clara's bedroom, casting a soft glow over the tangled sheets and discarded clothes. Chase watched her sleep for a long moment, memorizing the curve of her lips, the way her hand rested gently against his chest, as if she belonged there. And for a while he convinced himself that everything was okay, that the bet didn't matter anymore, that what had started as a game had evolved into something he couldn't name but couldn't let go of either. But guilt is a stubborn thing. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in the back of your mind at the quietest moments, reminding you that no matter how beautiful, the lie, it's still a lie. He left before she woke, scribbling a note on the back of a receipt. Had to run for a meeting. Last night was everything. Call you later, C. He didn't go to the meeting. He wandered the city instead, walking without a destination, trying to silence the echo of Brandon's message. The truth was ugly now, too close to the surface. He wanted to delete the texts, erase the memory of that conversation, but he couldn't, because it had happened, because it had been real, even if everything after had become something more. Clara woke alone. She reached for him and found only air and a note. Her heart sank for a second, but she pushed the doubt aside. Chase was busy. He had told her about his world. She trusted him. She wanted to. That evening she texted him. "Hope your meeting went well. Want to come by after your day's done." He didn't answer for hours. When he did, it was brief. "Long day. We'll call later." He didn't call. The next day he didn't stop by the bookstore. Clara tried to ignore the tightening in her chest. People get busy, she told herself. He's not avoiding you. But something had shifted. She felt it in the silence between their messages, in the space between what he said and what he didn't. 3 days passed, still no visit. On the 4th, she was restocking a shelf when she heard the bell above the door. Her heart jumped. She turned too quickly, but it wasn't Chase. It was Brandon. She had seen him once before at the library event. Tall, loud, overconfident. He walked in like he owned the air. He spotted her and grinned. "So you're the famous Clara." She blinked. "Excuse me." He stepped closer, eyes scanning the shelves with disinterest. "I've got to hand it to Chase. We didn't think he had it in him." "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Brandon smiled wider. "Nah, but I know you." "Well, not you exactly, just the story, the bet." The word slammed into her chest like a fist. "What bet?" Brandon looked amused. "You mean he didn't tell you?" He laughed under his breath. 7 days. Take the bookstore girl to bed. Make the prince fall for the pauper. It was all a joke, but damn, I didn't think he'd actually do it. Clara stood frozen. Every part of her screamed for it not to be true. Brandon raised an eyebrow at her silence. "You didn't know, huh? That's awkward." She stared at him, her throat dry. "Get out." He shrugged. "Suit yourself. just thought you should know who you were giving your heart to." He walked out without another word. The bell chimed again. Clara stood there for a full minute, unable to breathe. Then, like ice, cracking under pressure, her body moved. She grabbed her bag, her coat, and walked straight to the street. The cold air hit her face like a slap, but it wasn't enough to numb the ache growing in her chest. She didn't cry, not yet, not until she reached her apartment, locked the door, and collapsed onto the floor. Then it came. The sobs, the betrayal, the humiliation, the pain of knowing she had given her everything to someone who had treated her like a game. She didn't pick up when Chase called that night. She didn't read his messages. She blocked his number. The next morning she was gone. Chase showed up at the bookstore with flowers. Her coworker stared at him unimpressed. She quit, he said, didn't leave a forwarding address. Chase's stomach dropped. When yesterday, after some jerk came in and said something that made her cry. Don't know what he said, but she was different after that. Chase stood there gripping the flowers like a fool. He tried her apartment. Empty. He waited for days. Nothing. He searched. Nothing. His calls went straight to voicemail. His emails bounced back. Clara had disappeared, and Chase felt the walls closing in. At first, he told himself she needed space. Then he told himself she was being dramatic. Then finally, he stopped lying to himself. He had ruined it. He had destroyed something pure for the sake of a joke. And the worst part, he hadn't even realized how much she meant to him until she was gone. He stopped going to parties, stopped answering Brandon's messages, stopped caring about meetings and profits. Every part of his life that had once felt full now felt meaningless. He remembered the way she looked at him the night they made love, like she saw something in him no one else ever had. He remembered how she trusted him, how she let him in, and he betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. He didn't even know where to start making it right. All he knew was that the silence she left behind was louder than anything he had ever heard. Months passed, the seasons changed, winter bled into spring. Still no sign of Clara. But Chase didn't stop looking, not because he believed she would forgive him, but because he had to try. Because for the first time in his life, love wasn't a game. And losing her wasn't just a consequence. It was a punishment he couldn't undo. Chase Montgomery was not used to feeling powerless. In business, he always had the upper hand. In meetings, his voice was the loudest. In any room, he was the one people turned to. But in the months after Clara disappeared, he had become a shadow of that man. The empire still stood, the board still obeyed, and the profits still rolled in, but none of it mattered anymore. He lived in a penthouse that echoed with silence, filled with objects that once symbolized success, but now only reminded him of everything he had lost. He had hired private investigators, made quiet inquiries, even contacted people from Clara's nursing program, but no one seemed to know where she had gone. The few leads he had turned up nothing, and the longer the silence stretched, the more it gnawed at him. He had tried apologizing. He wrote her letters, long, messy confessions of guilt and regret. He sent them to every possible address he could find, but they all came back unopened. He even went to her mother's apartment, but a new tenant lived there now. The woman said the mother had passed away just a few weeks after Clara left, and Clara hadn't returned. That news hit Chase harder than anything else. Clara had lost her mother, and he hadn't been there. He hadn't known. He hadn't even been a thought in her world anymore. The realization crushed him. Not only had he betrayed her trust, but he had abandoned her in the darkest chapter of her life. He remembered the way Clara once held his hand as she spoke about the fear of losing her mom. He remembered how strong she had been holding it all together for so long. And when it mattered most, he hadn't been there. He had become the exact kind of man she never deserved. One night, months later, Chase found himself at the edge of Brooklyn Bridge, looking out over the city that used to feel like his kingdom. The wind was sharp, the water below dark and endless. He wasn't suicidal, but he was lost, deeply, utterly lost. He had all the money in the world, and not a single soul who made him feel like a man instead of a machine. He stood there until dawn thinking. Then he made a decision. If he couldn't find Clara, then he would become someone worth finding. The next morning, he walked into the Montgomery Holdings boardroom and announced his resignation as CEO. The room erupted. Voices shouted, board members demanded explanations, but Chase didn't flinch. "I built this company," he said, calm and clear. "I know exactly what it needs. And right now it doesn't need me. I've spent years accumulating power, and I used it to hurt someone who mattered more than any deal I ever closed. I'm done pretending." He left the boardroom with nothing but a leather folder and a weight off his shoulders. Over the next few weeks, he began quietly dismantling the version of himself he had spent a lifetime building. He moved out of his penthouse into a modest apartment near the Lower East Side. He sold his sports car, he declined every party invitation, and he started showing up at community events, not as a sponsor, not as a VIP, just as a man trying to make a difference. He donated quietly to the cancer treatment center where Clara's mother had been treated. He started volunteering at literacy programs for kids. He visited high schools to talk about mental health and the dangers of chasing success without meaning. Slowly, the press began noticing. "Billionaire drops empire to live like a common man," read one headline. "Montgomery's fall from grace or rise to purpose," asked another. Chase didn't care. He wasn't doing it for image. He was doing it because the old version of him had destroyed the one thing that mattered. And if there was any hope, any microscopic chance that Clara would see him again, he wanted her to see the real version of him, the one who had learned, who had suffered, who had changed. Almost a year after Clara disappeared, Chase stood outside a university auditorium in Boston. He had traveled 3 hours to get there, following a small mention in an online newsletter about a public health forum led by a nonprofit called Hearts Forward. The founder's name had caught his eye, Clara Bennett. He didn't know if she would be there. He didn't know what to expect, but he stood in the back row of that lecture hall as the lights dimmed and a familiar voice filled the room. When she stepped onto the stage, his breath caught in his throat. She was radiant. Not in the glamorous, polished way he had once been surrounded by, but in the quiet, powerful way of someone who had been broken and rebuilt, stronger than before. She wore a navy blue dress, her hair in soft waves, and her voice was steady, confident. She spoke about community care, about grief, about rising after loss. She spoke about love not romantic, but the kind that builds a foundation under your feet. And as he listened, Chase felt tears prick his eyes, because every word she said was a mirror, a reflection of everything he had destroyed and everything she had rebuilt without him. After the forum, people crowded around her, thanking her, hugging her, asking questions. Chase stayed back. He wasn't sure if he should approach. What right did he have? But then Clara turned. Their eyes met. Time stopped. She didn't smile, didn't run to him, but she didn't turn away either. She excused herself from the group and walked slowly toward him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said softly, "I wondered when you'd show up." Chase's voice caught. "I wasn't sure I should." Clara looked at him, eyes unreadable. "You disappeared?" "You left first," he said, his voice cracking. "I deserved it, but I never stopped trying to find you." Clara nodded. "And what would you have said if you did?" He took a shaky breath. "That I'm sorry, that I was a coward, that I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me, because I didn't know what to do with something real. But mostly that I love you, and that I don't expect anything except the chance to say that to your face." Silence stretched between them. Then Clara said, "You hurt me." He nodded. "I know. You humiliated me. I lost everything. My mom, my home, my sense of safety. I know," he whispered. "And if I could go back and change it, but you can't," she interrupted. "So what now?" He looked at her, broken open but standing. "Now I ask you if there's anything I can do to help build whatever you're building, even if it's just carrying chairs or passing out flyers. I'll do anything, just to be near the person who made me want to be better." Clara stared at him for a long time. Then she said, "You can help us set up next week's clinic. We're short on volunteers." He blinked. "That's it." She shrugged. "That's where we start." The following week arrived faster than either of them expected. Chase showed up to the clinic in jeans and a plain t-shirt, looking more like a community college volunteer than a former CEO. Clara was already there, clipboard in hand, delegating tasks with calm precision. She barely looked at him when she assigned him to the supply tent, but her voice was steady and her instructions were clear. He didn't complain. He lifted boxes, filled water jugs, handed out masks, and sanitized clipboards without hesitation. The volunteers around him had no idea who he was, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He wasn't there to impress, he was there to earn. Over the course of the day, he watched Clara work. She moved through the crowd with ease, comforting patients, organizing the team, and giving people the kind of hope that couldn't be bought. Chase realized she had built something extraordinary, something far more valuable than the fortune he had walked away from. That night, as they packed up, Clara handed him a bottle of water and sat beside him on the clinic's back steps. For a moment they didn't speak. Then she asked, "So what happened to Montgomery Holdings?" He took a sip of water before answering. "I stepped down, sold most of my shares. I kept a small piece to fund some nonprofit projects. The rest is gone." She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" He looked at her. "Because I didn't want to be that man anymore. The one who made bets with hearts like yours. The one who thought power meant invincibility. I lost everything that mattered when I lost you, so I decided to rebuild." Clara studied him for a long moment. "Do you regret it?" He shook his head. "Losing you every day, but walking away from that life not once." The air between them softened. There was no forgiveness yet, not entirely, but there was something new, respect, recognition, a foundation being laid brick by brick. Over the next few weeks, Chase kept showing up. He became a constant at the clinics, learning how to pack medical kits, write intake forms, and even translate for patients who spoke only basic English. Clara didn't make it easy. She didn't rush, but she watched, and slowly her walls began to shift. One afternoon, after a particularly chaotic day at the clinic, Clara caught herself laughing at one of Chase's sarcastic remarks. It startled her, the laughter, the ease, the way he looked at her like nothing else existed. That night she found herself standing outside his modest apartment, unsure why she had come. When he opened the door, he didn't look surprised. He stepped aside, let her in, and made tea without a word. They sat on the worn couch, steam rising between them. She said quietly, "I used to think I needed someone strong, someone who could protect me from the world. But what I really needed was someone who respected how strong I already was." Chase didn't respond right away. He reached for her hand. "I see you now, Clara, not just the parts I wanted, all of you." She squeezed his hand back, not out of affection, but out of acknowledgement. "You broke me," she whispered. "I know, but I didn't stay broken. I know that too. I'm not the girl you met in the bookstore anymore. And I'm not the man who walked in." Silence filled the room. Then quietly, she said, "I miss reading out loud." He looked at her, then read to me. She pulled a small paperback from her bag. The Nightingale. The same book they had first talked about. She opened it and began to read, her voice calm and clear. Halfway through the first chapter, he closed his eyes, not because he was tired, but because her voice wrapped around him like a promise. That night she didn't stay, but she came back the next day, and the next. Days turned into weeks, and a rhythm formed between them. Not romance, not quite, but something close, something sacred. One evening, Chase invited her to an event, a small charity dinner for cancer research. It wasn't extravagant, just a rented hall, local donors, and a guest speaker. Clara hesitated at first, but agreed. She wore a simple black dress, and Chase couldn't take his eyes off her. During the dinner, the host stood up and announced a surprise. "We'd like to thank one of our anonymous benefactors. Tonight, someone who funded an entire new treatment wing for low-income families battling cancer. Please welcome Chase Montgomery." Clara turned to him stunned. He stood slowly and walked to the stage. His speech was brief. He spoke about watching someone he loved fight cancer, about feeling helpless, about learning what it meant to care. When he returned to the table, Clara whispered, "You did that." He nodded. "In your mother's name." Her breath caught. "You remembered I never forgot." Later that night, on the sidewalk outside the venue, Clara stopped and turned to face him. "Why me?" she asked. "Why was it me you bet on his face fell?" "Because you were different. Because I was arrogant. Because I thought I could take something pure and walk away untouched." "And did you know," he said, voice trembling, "you changed me, Clara. You ruined me in the best way." She stepped closer. "I don't trust easily anymore." "You don't have to," he said. "Just give me the chance to earn it." She reached up, touched his face. "I want to believe you. Then let me keep showing you." He leaned in, and this time she didn't pull away. Their kiss wasn't urgent. It wasn't desperate. It was quiet, healing, a promise spoken in silence. The next morning, Clara woke in his bed, wrapped in his arms, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt seen, respected, loved. Chase watched her sleep, thinking of how far they had come. From a cruel bet to a hard-won truth, from a lie to something honest. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. Whatever they built, they would build it together. And this time, he wouldn't let it fall apart. The sun rose quietly over the city, casting a golden light through the apartment windows. Clara stood in the kitchen, barefoot, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that Chase had kept since college. She wore one of his shirts, the sleeves too long, the collar a little loose. It was peaceful, not the kind of peace that came from perfection, but the kind that followed storms, hard-earned, fragile, but real. Chase stepped out of the bedroom, his hair messy, his smile soft. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. She leaned into him, closing her eyes for a moment. "You still smell like paint," she murmured. "We were painting for 6 hours," he replied, chuckling. "The clinic's finally done. Next week we open the doors." Clara smiled. "Do you realize what that means? That children won't have to wait 6 months for checkups. That single moms won't have to choose between food and medication. That people will be seen, really seen, without insurance cards or judgment." He looked at her pride and admiration in his eyes. "And it all started with you." She turned around slowly. "No, it started with pain, with betrayal, with heartbreak." She paused, but it didn't end there. "Because we didn't let it." Chase nodded, understanding more than words could say. They had walked through fire and come out scorched, but standing. A year ago, Clara was a girl left in pieces. Now she was a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes. And Chase. He had gone from a man who took without thinking to someone who gave without needing to be seen. Later that day, as the new clinic welcomed its first patients, Clara stood by the door with Chase at her side. The ribbon was cut, the cameras clicked, but the most meaningful moments weren't the speeches or the applause. They were the small ones. A child laughing as he received his first ever toothbrush. A mother holding back tears as a nurse explained her daughter's asthma would finally be treated. A teenager looking into a mirror and seeing kindness reflected back. Clara watched it all, her heart full. She glanced at Chase, who was crouched beside a young boy, showing him how to fill out his form. He looked up and met her gaze. He smiled. She smiled back. In that moment, everything made sense. The pain, the silence, the time apart. It had all led them here, not to a fairy tale, but to something better, something true. That night, as they lay in bed, Chase traced gentle circles on Clara's back. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd never taken that bet?" She turned her head, meeting his eyes. "You wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be this version of me." He nodded. "Then maybe the mistake was necessary." She leaned into him, whispering, "Maybe. But don't ever forget what it cost." "I won't," he said. "I promise." They drifted off to sleep, tangled in each other's arms, with no more secrets between them, just the quiet truth of two people who had faced the worst of each other and still chosen to stay. Because sometimes love doesn't come wrapped in perfection. Sometimes it comes in the form of redemption, of second chances, of becoming worthy. And for Clara and Chase, love was no longer about grand gestures or flawless beginnings. It was about the choice to keep showing up, again and again, even when it was hard, especially then. Because in the end, it wasn't about how they started. It was about how they refused to let the past define their future. She had been the girl he broke. He had been the boy who didn't know how to love. But now they were something else entirely. They were proof that even the worst mistake could lead to the most unexpected, most extraordinary kind of love. And in that quiet golden morning light, their story began again, not as a bet, but as a vow.